Hello, my name is Richard Corbett, and welcome to this week's Lunar Transit Report. In this episode, I'm going to take a look at the entire lunar month cycle ahead, starting on Monday, April 8th, until the next new moon on May 7th. Now, the moon, as we know, is so powerful in our world and in our lives. I think it's very supportive to take a look at the lunar cycle because the moon affects us at such a deep emotional level. We know that the moon controls the tides of the oceans of the world. Scientists say that the Earth's crust even bulges when we have a full moon. And we certainly know that it would affect us as having 75% water in our bodies. We are at a deep inner core emotional level affected by its cycle. Now, this lunar month or month that we'll be in starting on April 8th is incredibly dynamic and powerful. Uh, and maybe one of certainly the biggest aspects astrologically that we will see for the entire year are happening during this lunar cycle. It's getting a ton of media press. Well, for one, we're going to have the total solar eclipse across the United States. So many of you watching this may be participating and getting to see this event with your own eyes. Even if we're not in a location to see the eclipse, it is going to impact us at a very deep level. But let's take a look at the new moon, and I'll be going through the new moon, the first quarter moon, the full moon, the third quarter moon, and then back to the next new moon on May 7th, kind of setting a structure or a framework on how we can work with the intense energies we're going to be subjected to as we move through the month. But I will say, I'm very excited about this month. I mean, I would call this lunar cycle the month of initiation. And I'll explain in further detail what I mean by that. But it has tremendous mutative, transformational power that may affect our lives for the rest of the future. I mean, we may go into this lunar cycle in one way and literally come out different on the other. And as we go through the details here and I talk about these aspects and gates that are being activated by this month, I think we'll get a clearer picture of how we can align with the energy of the moon. As I go through this, remember, it's always most important to be connected to our personal authority, whether it's an inner authority or a cycle oriented authority like a reflector. This is our point of connection, our solid ground. It's our voice of truth. And when we're looking at a month that has such dynamic aspects, it will be more important than ever to follow authority. Once doing that, though, we may see that we are receiving some incredible invitations from these transits. That's why I call it the channel of, or the cycle of initiation. So let's break it down here and take a look at the chart you're looking at, which is for the exact time of the new moon solar eclipse. And again, with a new moon, it's the new start to the new lunar cycle. So very a helpful time to be setting your intentions, to be doing some contemplation, meditation, regulating within the body what this cycle may bring, what our highest sense of inspiration and vision that we may have for our life, because we're going to have a lot of our individual channel and gates. The inner core of our truth and inspiration is definitely being touched during this cycle. So a great time to take that new moon perspective, to write some things down, spend some time reflecting and envisioning where you might be going with your higher sense of your purpose. So, yes, this solar eclipse, wow, is it a big one? What makes this solar eclipse different from others? Well, let's start with the fact of an eclipse itself is very extraordinary. I mean, if we go back into ancient times, they were very feared. I mean, in ancient times, cultures were so connected to the sun, the moon, the earth. They really lived in rhythm of the cycles. And so to have the sun go dark in day or the moon to disappear at night, it was very shocking. They often felt that it meant there could be a king or queen being overthrown, or maybe a famine was coming to the community. However, as time went on and our consciousness grew, they began to realize that eclipses are just a regular astronomical event. They're extraordinary to witness, but they happen every 6 months or so, and they come in twos or threes. And so they actually use them to help develop the calendars that we use today. Around 1500 AD, we were moving from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar, and the eclipses were actually used to check their math. And they would predict the eclipse, and if they got it right, they knew their measurements were correct. So my favorite words for eclipses are rectification and clarification. They may bring something that appears to be sudden, but yet upon reflection, we may have that feeling where it's like, oh, yeah, well, I'm not so surprised. Yeah, I guess I could have seen it coming, but I didn't. But the eclipse can have that quality to it. With the sun or the moon going dark, it actually can illuminate something that we weren't looking at. And so, in that sense, it can bring a deep sense of clarification and rectification. This new moon eclipse is also happening in Aries, the first sign of the astrological zodiac, the sign of self expression, ruled by Mars. It's about confidence and going forward as our authentic selves. The other thing making this eclipse so incredibly unique is that the planet Chiron is exactly conjunct the eclipse. As you can see in the chart that I have here on the astrological wheel, this new moon eclipse is at 19 degrees Aries and 24 minutes, which is exactly where Chiron is. Now, Chiron has been part of my weekly transit report for months now. It has been traveling near the North Node and the nodal axis, and it actually was conjunct the North Node and the axis in mid-February. So we've been going through a very emotional period due to so many planets that had been in Pisces. Many of them have moved into Aries now. But this idea of the wounded healer, healing wounds from our past. Chiron has an amazing mythological story. He was the greatest centaur in all of Greek mythology. He was a healer, a teacher, an educator, and a facilitator. And so this archetype is very much at the core of everything that's happening in the sky right now, and particularly at this eclipse. The idea of that chironic wound is that wherever we see within ourselves fear, doubt, and insecurity, if we go down into the roots of that, it most likely comes from some prior experience, maybe a traumatic experience, childhood conditioning, anything that altered our natural state that we're still dealing with. You know, we often develop maladaptive strategies to cope with triggering experiences that are not necessarily healthy for us. But this recent period has been incredibly supportive to dig into this story, to find out what is holding us back. If this resonates with anyone listening, that where do I have my insecurities? Where do I lack self confidence? What's been holding me back into my highest vision of myself and my purpose in life? And so this eclipse is really bringing to the surface the power of this initiation, what may appear during this period. But the chironic element here is at the forefront. So again, if you're doing any sort of healing work on yourself, if you're working with others, or even just being a friend to your friends and family, a wonderful time to support each of us as we work through these chironic wounds that help support us along our hero's journey. The idea of that chironic wound is something that it's not about getting rid of the wound. We can never take these terrible experiences that may have happened to us away, but we can reframe them, and we actually can alchemize them from a wound into a gift that we can share with others in a very empowering way. And to me, that's a large part of the message of this solar eclipse happening on April 8th. And so we also have, I just want to point to these planets here that we can see in Aries. What an incredible lineup. I mean, we have Venus, the North Node, the new moon, the sun, Chiron conjunct, as I mentioned. And now we also have Mercury at the head of that lineup. Now, all of these planets are moving in a counterclockwise direction around the wheel, but Mercury at the head of the line turned retrograde on April 1st. So on April 8th, which has this chart at the solar eclipse, Mercury is going to be moving in the opposite direction of all those planets. Now, Mercury retrogrades often get a bad rap in pop astrology. You know, we talk about travel delays, lack of communication, and so forth. But remember that Mercury is in retrograde for almost 45% of every calendar year. So we can't shrug everything off to Mercury in retrograde being a bad thing. In fact, it is a beautiful thing. Mercury is the messenger planet. It's always near the sun. In fact, Mercury's never more than 28 degrees away from the life force energy of the sun. Mercury supports the life force energy through understanding things. It represents our intellect, our thinking, our communication. So whenever Mercury's in retrograde, we have an opportunity to pause, to ponder, to reflect, to review what we've been going through. So while we have a lot of energy in Aries that's saying, let's move forward, let's blast ahead here, Mercury's standing at the front of that line saying, not so fast. So I think we'll see as we get past this lunar cycle, we're going to be in a whole different energy frame from the transits. But I think at the moment here, just to remember that it's kind of like look left, look right, look left again. Allow Mercury to do its work, to just pause and see what's happening with the message of all these planets. So let's continue through them, but very important to note that actually at this eclipse, Mercury is in retrograde and will be conjuncting, as you'll see in my report, Chiron, the sun, moon, of course, and even it'll go all the way back to the north node position in gate 51, line 1, before it moves forward again. And so this eclipse is happening in gate 51, the new moon. And wow, what an incredible gate in the body graph. The channel of initiation, which is why I'm giving this report that name. Even though we're not seeing the full channel, it will come back into play 2 days after this new moon on April 10th. But the new moon itself is in the gate of shock. Such a powerful gate. The hexagram is thunder over thunder. It's called the arousing. Such a deep reverberating power that this gate of shock has, and that's in the channel of initiation, which offers an invitation to move from the lower self ego identity of who I am and who the needs and resources that I have into this upleveling into the higher self identity. So I think of it like an upgrade, an uplevel, an initiation into our higher sense of purpose and inspiration. So this eclipse is happening in a very dynamic place in the wheel. And again, also in Aries, thinking about self-expression and confidence. Chiron is right there in that gate 51, as we mentioned with the eclipse, and of course the North Node as well. Additionally, as we move through the planets, we have Mars is approaching its conjunction with Saturn in Pisces. Now, Mars in Pisces is in an interesting spot. The planet that rules Aries, right? This powerful god of war about aggression, sometimes a little impetuous, but Mars is very important to our archetype. It's important for how we get things done, how we go after life with zeal and passion. But yet in Pisces, it's in the water. So it's like a warrior swimming through the water. So he's not in his full strength, which he will be before the end of the month when he moves into Aries. But he's swimming his way along here in gate 63 along with Saturn. Now we'll see the conjunction in just a few minutes, but this we can feel at the eclipse, this conjunction is building. Now, whenever Mars and Saturn line up, and we historically have called them the two malefics, because they can bring challenging aspects, right? Not only the immaturity of Mars and the limitations of Saturn, but I think they're holding a really special key for this eclipse and the conjunction that they'll have just a few days later on April 10th. Saturn is the planet of structure. It is the planet of the taskmaster, the limitations. And here it is in the watery world of Pisces. And so I think what the gift that Saturn is offering us not only through its entire journey through Pisces, but particularly in gate 63 here, is providing structure into this mystical spiritual world of dreams, passions, and imaginations, our highest sense of creativity. So I think whatever modalities one may be working with, to really incorporate them on a daily basis as we make our way through the lunar cycle. And Saturn is asking and encouraging us to do that. I'll talk more about the conjunction with Mars in the next slide when we get to the exact conjunction. We also have a growing building conjunction between Jupiter and Uranus in Taurus. They're very close right at the eclipse. They're not at their perfection or exact conjunction just yet, but they will be on April 20th. So that's also part of this lunar cycle. So I'll be coming back to that, but it is part of this eclipse. In fact, it's semi-sextile to the 19 degrees that the eclipse and new moon is actually happening at. Now, semi-sextiles are not necessarily comfortable. There's no real frame of reference when we're talking about planets that are next door and one sign over, but they're intricately connected, so that expansive energy of Jupiter lining up with the electricity, sudden exotic nature of Uranus that can bring anything to the table, right? It's this dramatic breakthrough like lightning. That's also part adding this power and unusualness to this eclipse and what it may bring. Now we have there in gate 23 at the time of the eclipse, we can see Uranus is at 23 line 3 and Jupiter's at 23 line 1. Now that perfect conjunction will happen in line 4, but it's important to note that Uranus has been in 23 for a very long time. It has already done its entire retrograde phase in 23. It went all the way retrograde back to line 1. It's stationed and it's now moving forward. What an incredible place for Uranus. I think there's a very strong resonance between the electric, sudden, empowering nature of Uranus and individual circuitry itself, which is about empowerment and mutation. Gate 23 is called the gate of assimilation, splitting apart. It's in the channel of structuring, and it speaks very much to the individual creative expression. And this is where this conjunction is going to be taking place. So this comes back to the idea of this initiation, that something is happening during this lunar cycle that is offering us the opportunity to touch on the very deepest, most empowering, creative inspiration that may be contained within us. And I think as we look at the lunar cycle, we can look at the chapters of each quarter of this moon to help guide us in the messages that we are receiving from the transit field. And then lastly, I want to talk about Pluto, which has also been in gate 60 for a very long time. And Pluto being the planet of death, rebirth, and transformation, the lord of the underworld, the planet that helps uncover hidden truths that we need to know on our incarnation path. It's a very powerful planet. It often comes with a chill, if you will. It's not like that Jupiter, which has that benevolent nature of showing us an abundant nature of truth. No, this brings the plutonic power of finding our truth, which means we often have to go into that dark cave that we've been avoiding. And so here it is at this eclipse in the gate called acceptance and also called limitation. Now, in the tagline of the Ravi Ching for gate 60, it says that the first step in transcendence is acceptance. And I think this is a very important message as we set our intentions for this new moon cycle, to accept whatever comes. As we move into a higher version of our personal truth and this need for healing, which can elevate our frequency and our sense of authenticity, that there requires a degree of plutonic acceptance. There are simply some things that we cannot change, but we can change what's inside of us. We can heal from these wounds. And the first step is to accept whatever happened, to surrender to the process that needs to be done. And that can lead to the mutation. This is in the channel of mutation, gate 60 to gate 3. And that mutation is very much part of all of the individual activations that we will be having this lunar month. So let's go ahead and move forward a couple of days. Now, 2 days after the new moon solar eclipse, on April 10th, a number of things are happening. The sun will move into gate 42, line 1, as you can see here. This is called the gate of growth, and it's in the channel of maturation, a design of balanced development. What a beautiful place for the sun to be during the first quarter phase of the moon. At this point, every day, the moon is gaining illumination. It's becoming brighter in the night sky every night. So, as we move through the first half of the lunar cycle, it's a building of energy, a building of illumination. It's like an in breath. Energy is rising, and we can be moving forward towards these intentions that we've set. It's a growing phase, and it will come to its height, a heightened energy once we reach the quarter moon. But here we are, just a couple of days after the new moon, and having the sun in gate 42, the gate of growth, I think is very supportive. It speaks to evolution. It speaks to maturity with time. And I think it's going to take some time to assimilate the power of this lunar cycle. It's quite extraordinary. We may not even recognize it completely by the end, but I think this lunar month will be one of those periods in life where we look back years later and then we can really see, wow, what a different life it was before and after this period of time. So, Sun in gate 42, which puts the Earth in gate 32, very supportive to find the grounding nature of the Earth in the gate of continuity. Duration. This is the ancient instinctual awareness to know what has value for transformation, which is part of what this entire lunar cycle is going to be about. So, again, finding ways to ground yourself, to regulate your nervous system. There are going to be some tremendously volatile emotions throughout this month, whether for yourself and certainly what you may see in the world around you. It's a pretty, potent, volatile time out there. So I think that helps to be aware of that, right? That idea of regulating for myself, being kind and compassionate to others, because everyone is being affected by this very powerful cycle. But relying on that grounding aspect, that it can bring this awareness through our intuition of how to move forward for growth and maturity. Also on April 10th, we can see here the channel of initiation has become defined between gate 25 and gate 51. So we have Chiron and the North Node in gate 51, and Neptune has just moved into gate 25, line 1. Now, this channel has been like a drumbeat already. Just in March, let me give you the dates. We've had the North Node here for quite some time. So, this channel of initiation was activated by Mercury in gate 25 from March 9th to March 12th. Then we had the Sun in gate 25 from March 18th to March 23rd for a whole week. And as we'll see, we also well, I didn't mention this, but Venus was also in gate 25 from April 3rd to the morning of the eclipse. Venus just left gate 25 early in the morning, and the eclipse chart that I was showing was for 12:20 p.m. Mountain Time. And so at the solar eclipse chart, we saw that it wasn't activated, but it had been regularly. And again, here we are on April 10th with Neptune moving into gate 25. And now we're going to have this channel activated for the rest of the lunar cycle. And so that's where I'm giving it this name of the whole month of the initiation. Now, also on April 10th, as you can see, Mars has reached the exact conjunction. Well, in this chart, it's just a few minutes of a degree shy of the perfection, but it's in the 14 degrees. And so that's happening in gate 63, line 4. This is called the gate of doubt in the human design body graph. It's in the channel of logic, which is so incredibly interesting because it's about logic, but gate 63 is in Pisces, the dreamy, watery world of Neptune. And it's called after completion, but it's not the completion because we still have gate 64 afterwards, which is called before completion. And gate 64 being the gate of confusion, is in Virgo, which is about detail. So if you've ever taken a look at gate 63 and gate 64 in the Rave Mandala, it's a wonderful source of contemplation. And to me, it just really speaks to the mystical nature of life itself. It also speaks to the spiral of life. It speaks to the fact that as soon as we establish a logical truth, it is now on a pedestal waiting for something else to come along and disprove it, right? I mean, we had Einstein's theory of relativity that was supposed to explain everything, and now we have string theory, which doesn't fit with the theory of relativity. But just to use a physics example, truth is always changing. Truth is unique for each one of us. And I think the gate of doubt and the channel of logic coming from Pisces really speaks to that quality. So in line 4, it's called the line of fragmentation. And it's one of those Ray V. Ching lines that Ra Uru wrote that's a little bit challenging. It really speaks to the fragility of the line 4 and the externalization. But here, when you read this line, it speaks to giving that individual expression no matter what. No matter what the odds, no matter what the cost, it's the fragmentation of my personal creativity and inspiration. So to have this Mars Saturn conjunction there, we have the power of Mars and we have the structure of Saturn. And it can be, Saturn meeting Mars is kind of a reality check. Mars is wanting to plow through Pisces and get on with it and get to Aries, but Saturn is standing here and saying, not so fast. But I think the idea of the conjunction here at this most potent time of the solar eclipse, and again, here exact just 2 days later, is speaking that we can have our doubts. In fact, this may be somewhat anxiety inducing, right? We really are doubting, where's it all going? Where's the logic? Why does none of this make sense? But it is for a reason. And I think part of what I'm seeing from this lunar cycle is being willing to accept, surrender, and adjust. We may need to change our attitude and perspective about what's logical and possible. Things can happen faster than we think. Healing can come to the world faster than we think, maybe, especially due to this potent eclipse. So it's easy to get overwhelmed, filled with anxiety by the state of the world, the news that we see. So I think the message we're getting here with this lunar cycle is to go inward, to touch on the core essence of who we are. When we're dealing with that, we are literally elevating the frequency of our vibration, and we can have more impact on the world with our higher sense of self. And so I think that's part of the dynamic with that Mars-Saturn conjunction at gate 63. To let it do its thing, yes, it'll provide doubts and anxieties possibly, doesn't make sense, but yet to realize that it's changing, it's evolving, it's in the watery world of Pisces, to allow new downloads, new insights that may change our perception of logic are very possible, and I would say even required as we go through this portal, if you will. This is a very transformative time, and I think we'll see more aspects that lend to that story. Also, what will happen on April 11th is that the sun, Mercury is going to back up this is April 10th that you're looking at. On April 11th, that Mercury Sun conjunction will be exact. And I think all of the Mercury conjunctions are very important because it's sharing information with each planet as part of this cycle, right? And so as it marches backward through the wheel and touches on each of these planets. I'll be going into much more detail of these on my weekly transit report. I'll talk about each aspect for every day. I hope you all will find this report supportive and follow me along for my weekly transit reports. I'll put the link here, and you can find them at emergebydesign.net, not .com, emergebydesign.net. And I'll be providing not only the daily aspects, but supportive tools and tips for embodiment to regulate and align with these powerful forces that we're working with this month. Also, as we look at this chart on April 12th, we can see that Pluto has moved forward into gate 41, line 1. That's a significant movement. Now, Pluto's going to go retrograde very soon. You'll see in my charts. It's actually going to move all the way back to Capricorn again, which we're not completely done with. It's got to go back in one more time. It's going to create some challenges, I think, as it wraps up its business in Capricorn, but we'll be talking about that in future transit reports. Okay, so this brings us to April 15th, 1 week after the new moon. So we're in what we call the first quarter moon. At this point, the moon is a half moon in the sky, and she is building with illumination and energy. And at the quarter moon, you can see here in the astrological wheel, the moon is at 26 degrees Cancer, which is an exact square to the sun at 26 degrees Aries in that gate 42, line 6. Now, what makes this first quarter moon so unique? Well, it's the fact that the moon is in her home sign. She is in Cancer. So all of the beautiful qualities of the moon, of the drive and the nurturing and the caring and the nourishment that she brings, she's at her zenith of power in this sign, more than any other sign. And the sun is exalted in Aries, right? And so he is like treated like the royalty that he is. So they're both in very powerful locations of the zodiac wheel in and of themselves, but they're also in a square, which is the most dynamic energy that there is. A square is like an intersection. It's a dynamic energy that is asking for resolution, some sort of conflict resolution, if you will, or movement of energy. It's very dynamic anytime we see a square. And so here we are at that first quarter moon where it's like we're moving forward towards our vision, towards our intentions. Now, we want to follow authority. There's nothing predictive here about what you should do. It's about following your authority. But if you're aligned with this, you may have many opportunities where you can move forward, that you can overcome obstacles, that there's interference that can be eliminated, but we're really gaining emotional clarity, emotional strength through the illumination of the moon. And it's a very dynamic period at this first quarter stage. And again, that's emphasized by the signs that they're in. Now, the moon in Cancer is in gate 62, the gate of details. Also part of the logical circuitry that Mars and Saturn are in gate 63. I think at this fourth quarter moon, the moon is asking us, do we have the details? Are we clear on what we're working with here? To really reflect on that, to be in some sense organized with these movements. It can be very conflictual. Now, the reason I say that is that as you're looking at the astrological wheel and you see the moon in Cancer right now, for the entire next 2 weeks, the moon is going to be by herself in this half of the wheel, right? We have 3 planets in Pisces, we have Venus, North Node, Mercury, Chiron, and the Sun all in Aries. So they have very focused energy, right? We have the Aries energy wanting to move us forward. We have Pisces, the closing of the cycle, right? Pisces is the involution, evolution, dissolution, preparing for something new. Very different energies. Well, as the moon goes through each zodiac sign, and it takes about 2.5 days for each sign, she's going to be forming soft aspects with one of those signs and hard aspects with the other. So at the first quarter moon I'm talking about here, where the moon is going to be squaring all of the planets in Aries over those 2.5 days, she's going to be trining the planets in Pisces. Now that pattern, this sort of push-pull conflicting emotions, is going to continue for the rest of this cycle here, right? So when she goes into the fire sign of Leo, well, then she'll be trining all the planets in Pisces, but she'll be squaring the planets trining the fire signs in Aries, but she'll be squaring the water signs in Pisces. And I just want to point that out. I don't have the time in this summary. I'll be doing that in the weekly transit report. But we're going to be feeling very conflicting emotions And again, she's by herself over here, having these very focused conversations with these highly energized astrological signs. So that's where I say the emotional turbulence of the month, I would give it a pretty high score. So it's going to be very important, again, number one, to follow your personal authority. And number two, to use your modalities of self regulation, right? It's the idea of taking that deep breath. When things get us elevated, go to your tools. And now we'll be offering a number of those in the weekly transit report. Some writing exercises and physical exercises you can do to really stay within yourself right now. It's going to look a little harried out there in the public world. Everybody's going to be going through these very intense emotions. But that's where we're getting this from. We're having a number of the planets are in this flowing soft aspect, and the other half are totally conflicting. And that pattern will continue. So don't be alarmed by it. Just be aware that we can listen to our emotions. What are they saying to me? Doesn't mean we have to act on them. That's all about following authority, but we can be aware of them. Could be a wonderful time to journal right now. I would highly encourage everyone to be taking some notes down every day. How are we feeling? It doesn't mean we need to act on them. It's just we'll be able to reflect later in the lunar cycle to see what we're going through right now. So that gate 23, very important because we have the channel of initiation moving us into our higher self, and we have the gate of assimilation and individual expression. Such a large message for this entire month. Now, as we move past the first quarter moon, now this is another good slide. When you look at the astrological wheel, you can really see from the graphics here that moon, how it's trining. Fire sign Leo is trining the Aries fire sign, but then it's in a quincunx to the Pisces. And that's what I'm talking about. Each day is going to bring a frictional emotional quality to it. But just remember that the moon is doing a very important job. Again, as she travels over here all by herself on this side of the wheel, having these conversations, working through this eclipse portal that we were in, seeing where we're going in this idea of healing ourselves. This is such a strong theme to go back and reflect on where we incurred these wounds. Where did we first develop this fear, doubt, and insecurity? And how do we change our perspective? How do we alchemize what was a wound into our gift? So there's a number of other things happening as we move between the first quarter moon and the full moon. Let's see, on April 17th here. Venus moves into that gate 51 line 1 and will conjunct the north node. So now Venus has added her frequency to the channel of initiation. The moon in Virgo, as I mentioned, will quincunx all the planets in Aries. And then on the 19th, the sun will move into Taurus, so that'll be a very different frequency from the sun. And also on the 19th, Mars will have been in gate 22 in line 5, and it will sextile that Jupiter and Uranus in gate 23. Now, when we think about the power of Mars in gate 22, the gate of grace, it's called in the human design body graph. In the solar plexus, it's dealing with our emotional expression of individuality. And it's in a sextile and supporting a free-flowing energy. With that conjunction, we can see just about exact at this noontime chart, we see that Jupiter and Uranus are in gate 21, just a few minutes of a degree apart. That conjunction is at its perfection at 7:21 p.m. And also, I want to mention the morning of April 20th, the moon would have trined that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. So the moon gives her energy to it in that free-flowing trine. Then we have Mars sextiling that, and here we have this exact conjunction. Now, I'm not going to take a guess at what we may see in the world with this most explosive, powerful conjunction, but I want to bring it back to where we are, which is this idea of personal growth and development in the gate 23. I think it's just extraordinary. I think, again, whatever self-development work in terms of becoming a higher version of ourselves, really being that full, empowered, following our authority to our unique sense of authentic expression, this transit is just so powerful and incredible. And I think we'll have to see down the road here what comes of this. But the fact that it's in this lunar cycle is important, right? That it was part of a solar eclipse to begin with. And then we had the first quarter moon. And so we're approaching the full moon, which would be halfway through the lunar cycle. And we get this most intense aspect. Very dynamic. We'll just have to see. But I think for working on that sense of deep inner creativity, wow, what a special time to really dig deep into that. I'm very excited to see how this turns out for us. Now, on April, this brings us to the full moon on April 23rd in Scorpio, fixed water. Such a passionate, intense sign ruled by Pluto. And Pluto has that ability to uncover truths. And so we can see in the astrological wheel that Pluto in gate 41, line 1, is forming a T square with the full moon in Scorpio and the sun in Taurus. So as we can see, the sun had moved into gate 27, the gate of caring and the channel of preservation. It's about nurturing, right? Now, the moon being in gate 28 over in the splenic awareness center is the gate of the game player and the risk taker. It's in the channel of struggle. And so this full moon in gate 28 is bringing this quality of what needs to be done for this purpose, this mission, this higher sense of creativity and vision that I am on. And the full moon is always about the culmination since the new moon, right? It was building, and at the full moon, she's at her zenith of illumination in the night sky. So it's a very intense full moon, and it's related to the idea of what have we learned during these past 2 weeks, going through those intense emotional periods and the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in 23. We had the Saturn and Mars conjunction in gate 63. There was a lot of activity and maybe effort involved to move through obstacles and overcome or adjust and all. But now that we've reached the full moon, it's about this idea of let's take another breath here because we're going into a very different phase after this full moon. But at the moment with the sun in gate 28, and it's line 3, both the sun and the earth. So at the full moon, we have this line 3 quality, which is the line of mutation, experimentation. It may not be perfect, but it's about trying it, right? We've gone through a lot in these 2 weeks, but at this culmination, we want to maybe have a sense of gratitude and appreciation for where we've come from and what we're preparing for. And as we go through the waning phase of the moon over these next 2 chapters of the cycle, we are moving into a different energy here, right? It's not necessarily about starting things, it's about completing things. But what's important to note for sure is that Pluto is in a square to the full moon. And so it's bringing its extra depth of power to help us uncover through the work we were doing, through the intense examination of our healing process, what have we learned? Because as we go into the waning phase, it's going to be a time of reflection and maybe pruning and so forth. I'll talk more about that when we get to the exact third quarter moon. Also, with the full moon, that Mercury that is in retrograde is just 1 degree away from that north node, right? And it's actually going to turn forward at the exact conjunction of the nodal axis. Venus has moved into gate 42, line 3, which is where the sun was when it was conjunct Mercury on its retrograde. So again, that gate 42 getting activated, a very important part, I think, of the entire lunar cycle. This idea of growth and maturity with time and patience. Very important, I think, during this cycle. Mars has moved into gate 36. And we can see that Jupiter-Uranus, even though the conjunction, we're past it by 3 days, still very strong, still definitely part of the background frequency. Now, as we move past the full moon, finally on April 25th, there's Mercury turning direct. We have, again, as the moon in Scorpio, it's going to continue with that same emotional quality, right? When it's in Scorpio, it's trining Saturn, Mars, and Neptune. But it's in a quincunx to the Aries now. So just want to help us be aware that the emotional quality to this month, it's really, it's up and down. It's all over the place. It's twist and turning and tugging and pulling. Again, I think it's very important to find a space and container where we can allow ourselves to express these emotions during this most important time. But I think as long as we're using our modalities of self-regulation and embodiment, we can really stay on course here and really appreciate the gifts that the moon is offering as we move into this waning phase. The illumination each night will be decreasing, and we're moving into a point of reflection and still part of that rectification that the eclipse brought us. On the 27th, the sun will move into gate 24, which puts the earth in gate 44. And here we have the life force energy in the gate of rationalizing. It's in the channel of awareness, design of a thinker. But here there's this sun giving its life force energy to this idea of conceptualizing, what does my truth mean? You know, when we look back over these past couple of weeks at this point of this lunar cycle, what have we learned through that process? These were, I guess I've mentioned many times, such a potent new moon eclipse. Then we had a very powerful first quarter and then the full moon. So again, every quarter of this moon has very striking elements to it. And so I think for the week that the sun is in gate 24, there may be some downloads here. There may be something where we can find a sense, a rationalizing of what that personal inner truth means for us. And in this chart, looking at Sunday, April 28th, we can see that Mars is forming a conjunction in Pisces with Neptune in gate 25. So now we have Mars joining that channel of initiation. So as you can see, we've had just this, as I said, drumbeat of personal planets, and with Neptune, outer planets, and with the North Node, all in the channel of initiation. I mean, we are just in this phase, folks. I mean, I want to encourage us all that we may not know all the answers at the end of this lunar cycle, but the more we can be present and be, in a sense, with the moon, allowing her to move us like she does the tides of the oceans to process what we're going through, we may find tremendous gifts down the road as we go through this process. And yes, this Mars conjunct Neptune, you know, the image that I get when I see this is, the true spiritual warrior. You know, I think of the yoga pose of the warrior. And I think this is the quality of the Mars Neptune conjunction. You know, these frequencies, they operate on a spectrum. I mean, if we wanted to go real negative on this, Mars conjunct Neptune and Pisces, this is pure mad delusion. This is going off the deep end. And I think I only mention that to be aware of how challenging this may be for people we meet out there in the world, right? I mean, you just cannot get away from the emotional quality of this lunar cycle. And so this aspect, on the one hand, could be extremely difficult, but channeled well in that sense, meaning using that idea of the limitlessness of Neptune and her home sign of Pisces and the power of Mars, I feel spiritual warrior. And we saw just previously that Mars was connected with that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in gate 23. So just super powerful initiation, really tapping into the individual core of who our inner truth expression is. And then also, what will happen on the 29th, I don't have a slide for it. Mars moves into Aries. We can see Mars at just past 0 degrees and 4 minutes of Aries, still in that gate 25. And Venus has also moved into Taurus. So she's in her home sign now. So very, very different frequency coming from her. And then I want to talk about this April 30th because we also can see that we have the channel of mutation. Now, this is being activated on this day because the moon is in gate 60 and we have gate 3 is Venus in that Taurus, right? So we have Venus in gate 3, the moon in gate 60, and this channel of mutation. Now, this is happening just before the third quarter moon, which will be the next slide, the very next day. And we also can see that the moon is conjunct Pluto. Even though they're in different gates here, they're only separated by about a degree, right? So again, this emotional quality with the depths of truth here. It's also we can see that the moon and Venus are square because in the mandala, gate 3 and gate 60 are exactly square from each other, and I think that really indicates the dynamic, powerful quality of the channel of mutation, and that moon Pluto conjunction is half a square to Saturn, and then that Saturn is also half a square to Venus in gate 3. So that's a very dynamic red triangle you're seeing in the astrological wheel. And it really brings that Saturn back to the forefront again. It's at the apex of that square. And so, again, thinking about that gate 63, this is where we may have to shift our awareness, our perception, and our attitudes. Again, this entire cycle, we're talking about self-development of our strategy in a sense. Certain things, that certain wounds that were triggering us, now we have new tools, new modalities to release the pain and suffering of that limitation. And so this, I think I just wanted to highlight this fast moving transit of the moon because it's getting this channel of mutation right before its third quarter moment. So I think that really brings extra emphasis to the third quarter moon. And so let me go ahead and show that slide. So here we have the moon is past that conjunction to Pluto in the gate 41. She is in gate 13 and squaring the sun. Now, whenever we're thinking about any third quarter moon, we know that the moon is decreasing in her illumination every night. And we're going through this waning phase, this almost a sense of exhaling as we move back towards the next new moon. And so this is a time of release. This is a time that's wonderful for nourishing ourselves, self-care. It's a time for maybe we need new boundaries. We may have to have conversations within all our various relationships about what this change has meant for us, how we can bring more of our authentic selves to the table. And I think that was some really dynamic energy leading up to this third quarter chapter here as we move into the final week of this lunar cycle. The moon in gate 13, what a beautiful place for her at this exact third quarter moon. The gate of the listener. It's the role of openness and interaction with others. I love line 1. It's called the line of empathy. But what I'm seeing here with this transformational lunar cycle at the third quarter moon here, being in gate 13, is that how we are able to listen to each other could be enhanced. Our communication, our listening skills, being there for our friends and family that are going through such a possibly tumultuous time through this most dynamic astrological month. Beautiful footnote here, I think, with the moon in gate 13, this role of openness and interaction with others. And as I mentioned, that Mars, now that it's in Aries, this is where I think we're really starting to get a sense of moving somewhere, right? I was giving sort of a cautionary tale at the beginning of the cycle because of that Mercury retrograde. We're needing to review and reflect and so forth. But as we've passed all these different chapters of the cycle, we're in a different space here, but we are moving through the waning phase. This is where we're recollecting, reframing, reviewing, releasing, in a sense, this exhale portion of the cycle where we can tend to our personal creative garden, right? We're preparing for the next new moon. Also, after this third quarter moon on May 2nd, Pluto is going to go retrograde. And so that'll be a future story that we will talk more about. And also, as I move forward, I'm moving it forward to May 4th. where we can see that the moon is traveling through Pisces. Now, what's going to happen during this final quarter of the lunar cycle? The moon is going to conjunct Saturn, Neptune, Mars, North Node, Mercury, and Chiron again, all the way into Taurus. So she's having this, it's almost a sense of this wrapping up this conversation. You know, what can she bring to us through our emotional quality as she made this another trip around the zodiac? But these conjunctions here, they're all very important. I'll go into a little more detail on the weekly transits. But again, I just want to emphasize that we're preparing for the next phase. If you've made it this far, congratulations in the month, because it is a volatile one, and that's in the sense that I've been sharing, but so transformative. And so these will be very important conjunctions to follow in my weekly transit report. Also, we can see in this chart on May 4th, the sun being in gate 2, line 2, and the earth in gate 1. And also Jupiter moves into gate 8. Now, because of those movements, we can see that we are ending this lunar cycle with the channel of inspiration. And that's kind of where I was going with my message for this entire lunar cycle. That what's possible having come through this with your own process, following your own authority, making the adjustments and movements and flow to align with your true core of authenticity. Here we're having Jupiter, the planet of expansiveness, its benevolence and generosity in the gate 8 of contribution. This is the inspiration at its fullest, a very empowering, and not only for ourselves, but through our own authentic expression, we may empower others. So I think it's just a beautiful story that we are ending with this channel, also in individuality. So very connected to that channel of initiation that I've been talking about so much. And then to wrap it up here, I'll just give you a look at the next new moon, which we can see we have a very different lineup. So many planets in Taurus here. But again, that Mercury moving forward, Aries in our home sign. We're going to be in a different place after this lunar cycle, and I'll have much more to share about that in future transit reports. But I just want to share with you my optimism and encouragement to really embrace this period. It is quite literally a month not like any other. That we can, at least with this information, be aware of the turbulence, be aware of the emotional volatility that we may see in the world. But these transits, they are the music of the stars that we get to dance to, in a sense. Now, we want to, as I mentioned, always honor our personal authority. But anyone that's working on personal development, healing from past wounds, supporting others in that process as well, you could not ask for better tailwinds. And I think that's what I like to offer in these transit reports, is setting our sails, right? Setting them so that we can align with this energy, follow our personal authority, and experience that beautiful feeling of tranquility that comes with being authentic and honoring our personal inspiration. And I will leave it there with that. And I wish you all a wonderful solar eclipse and lunar cycle. Thank you.